The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, one of the most popular horror slasher movies in history. This movie is arguably one of my favorite movies of all time. I love the vibes of this movie. I love the story behind this movie and the characters. And debate that has been for a long time is, why is this movie so scary? Why is this movie always so unsettling, so creepy to the audience? And today I came to answer this question for you guys, and we're going to dive into, why does this movie give off so much fear to the audience? Before I get started, I just wanted to, quickly say we are so close to 500. At this point of this video, I'm at 495, so I'm so thankful for all of you guys, all of the subscribers, and if you're just joining in, then welcome to the channel. And yeah, let's get straight into the video. So the first thing I wanted to cover is the actual setting of this movie. It takes place in Kingsland, Texas, and throughout the movie, you're visiting all these unsettling, creepy houses. So the Sawyer house is the most popular location for this movie. It takes place probably halfway into the movie, and the rest of the movie takes place during it. This house just gives off so much creepiness, and the vibes are just so unsettling. The setting also consists of gas stations and slaughterhouses, but these locations just make you feel so isolated and so deserted. You're always feeling alone during this movie. I think the setting is a big factor onto why this movie is as terrifying as it is. Being trapped in the Sawyer house just feels like a nightmare, and that's not something you necessarily always want to think about. Going off of the setting, the characters in this movie are of course one of the most unsettling, I think. Bubba Sawyer, Leatherface, is just so creepy and eerie. The aura he brings himself is just so terrifying, and this is a character that doesn't come with any CGI or practical effects. This is simply just a man wearing a mask made of human flesh. Now, the part that brings this character so scary is another fact that I wanted to cover, is the realism of this movie. This is a movie that doesn't necessarily need any of the effects or any of the CGI that a lot of horror movies need. I just saw Alien, and it's known that Alien uses all these CGI and practical effects, and yes, it is scary, but what Texas Chainsaw does differently is this movie is based on, inspired by real life events. It's created to be realistic. This movie doesn't want to try to be, just some horror film that is scary and not real. This movie could happen, and I think that's one of the most scary parts of it, that this is entirely possible. And then off of Bubba, you have the cook, Grandpa, the hitchhiker. These are all characters in the same Sawyer family, and each of them just give off different levels of scariness. I think Grandpa has this sort of eerie vibe to him. Whenever you're around him, like something bad is gonna happen. The cook, at first he tries to, act like he's this helpful gas station clerk, but you soon find out that that is just his alter ego. He's just hiding who he truly is. And when you finally figure out that he is not the man he portrays himself to be, you have this feeling of doubt and regret that the characters face in this movie. The hitchhiker goes along that, he gives off this tone that is, he's just a hitchhiker who needs to get back to his house. He needs help. But in the bigger scheme of things, he is trying to trick these 5 friends into taking him to the slaughterhouse. And after this point, when you realize his intentions, you start to feel this lack in trust. Like, who is going to be good? Who is not going to be good? Is this person who they seem? And I just like how this movie, always flips expectations. You're always thinking one thing and the other happens, which I just find that you can't trust anything in this movie. I think the narrative is really slow at first, and it picks up really fast. It has a fast pace swap, and I don't necessarily say that when you have a slow paced movie that it is necessarily bad. I think the part of this slow pace just works perfectly, because with this slow pace, it gives you sort of this tension, this anxiety that you feel, as if you don't know when the killer is going to, attack, pop out. And when you have this sort of unsettlingness that everything is not what it seems, anything could happen at any point, just always brings you tension and always brings your nerves on edge. One of the most fearful factors for me is the fact that Tobe Hooper wants this film to be real. He wanted to portray this movie as real events, that it actually happened, and you can see that in the first opening shots of this movie. You have this creepy dialogue about 5 friends who go through this terrible fate and only one survives, and it says this is, and then it transitions into the movie. This is just such a good and such a capturing moment in this film. It's the first 30 seconds, but the first 30 seconds of this film are just so terrifying, and it really introduces what you're getting into. Like I said, the movie is inspired by real events, such as the serial killer Ed Gein, and when you have a real-life serial killer being the inspiration of this movie, there's bound to be a lot of horror in this movie coming from the realistic aspects, that this is just a serial killer. It's not an alien in outer space. It's not a robot coming from the future. It's not a killer clown from outer space. This is just a serial killer in Texas. Something else that goes under the radar for this movie is the music and the score for this. Now, when you think of good soundtracks for horror movies and good sound design, you normally go to, John Carpenter's Halloween, Friday the 13th. You never really talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre's, sound design. Every sound in this movie is so eerie, and it makes my skin crawl. I don't know how I'm gonna have to do some research, but I don't know how they created some of these, sounds for this movie. The first 5 minutes of this movie gives so many of them, and the graveyard scene where it's showing all these close-up shots of this corpse just uses all these shots and all these sounds that just are so tense and so creepy, and they just give all these bad effects to you. I really enjoy what this movie does to the viewer. I always go into this movie, and I've watched this movie probably 7 times. I'm very fond of this movie, but I love how every time I watch it, I'm always feeling on edge. I'm always tense, because this movie's realism just gives me the heebie-jeebies. Tobe Hooper really nailed this movie, and he didn't want this to be some blockbuster, horror movie with powers and stuff. He wanted this to be a down-to-earth serial killer slasher movie. I think the use of shots during this movie, the use of the score and stuff, always give an unsettling vibe. You have shots like the dinner scene and the abduction scene, and these always make me uncomfortable. I think that the whole point of this movie is to make you uncomfortable, and I think it's safe to assume that it works. This movie works at making you feel uncomfortable, and with that fact, I give you the reasons that this movie is just so terrifying. This is a movie that is probably in my top 10 favorite movies of all time. I just love what this movie brings, and I love how it's so different than so many other movies. It's so hard to find a movie like this again. And just to clarify, I am just talking about the first movie. The sequels to this movie can get a little bit goofy, a little bit unrealistic at times. So when I say I'm talking about all this scariness and realism, I'm only talking about the first movie, because this is the one that stuck with me the most. If you guys like this little dive into the horror of this movie, comment on other movies. You know, hit the like button, subscribe maybe. I mean, 5 more away from the big 500 is really big to me, and really gets me really excited for future projects to make. So anyways, wrapping this all up, I thank you guys for watching, and I'll definitely be seeing you in the next video.